My name is Dave Newber. I am from the factory in Albany, Wisconsin. This morning we're going to go with some information, starting out with aerial operations. This is mainly safety information. There will be a handout that will go with that. Grab one and pass one on. If you look at the cover of that handout, that is the cover of the aerial operations manual. Two of those manuals did come with the unit. So do locate them, spend some time reading through a lot of additional information. Again, this is just some page I copied out of there. Some items that I do want to highlight while we're in here. Remainder we will see out at the truck when we do our hands-on operating. And we're basically doing a walk around. So we're going to start out with this presentation. From there, we will go into the DPF regeneration system of your Cummins ISX engine. I do have another handout and I will go with that. So that presentation actually has audio, so I'll play that in its entirety. When I am done with that, we'll go into that handout, break it down, hopefully simplify things a little bit, and give you good understanding of that as well. So when we are done in here, at that point we're going to go basically to the front of the truck. We'll talk about a couple items on the ladder. From there, we're going to go, well, we look underneath the little hood area in front on your Velocity chassis. From there, we'll go into the cab and talk about cab controls. From there, we'll go to pump operator station. Mainly talk about aerial related items at the pump, but I'll see if you do have any questions there. I'm here as an aerial operations trainer, so I'm not a pump operations trainer or a foam operations trainer. I do know the pump system quite well. Foam system, they somewhat leave us in the dark with because we do have additional foam trainers at the factory, so I don't know a whole lot about the foam system. But anyway, if you do have questions about the water pump, pressure controller, that type of thing, feel free to ask at the pump operator station. But I'm not here as a pump operations trainer, so I just like to mention that. So if you get some additional training, don't say, well, the Pierce guy was here and he told us that. Well, no, the Pierce guy is telling you he's not a pump operations trainer, he's an aerial operations trainer. So you do want to go with that guy. I can guide you through operations, but I might not have everything, specific to the way you would want to operate. Just like if that guy came in, he could probably operate the aerial, but he might not have things specific or have a lot of the safety information that I may have. So from there, we'll go to the rear of the truck, talk about stabilizer controls, interlocks, and overrides, up to the turntable for turntable controls, interlocks, and overrides. At that point, we'll get the truck position where we can operate. I will do some demonstrations with the stabilizer setups, and I'll have each of you operate the stabilizers. And then from there, I'll do some demonstrations within the aerial and have each of you operate the aerial. We are done with that. We are going to do some water flow. Yep. So we will flow some water through the aerial as well. Basically, that would conclude. All right, if you have questions as we go through, I want you to ask questions. I know you don't want to mess up our video here, but I do want you guys to ask questions. It just helps me guide you through it. Put it this way, I go through a certain amount of information, I elaborate on some things. If you don't ask any questions, I'm going to assume that you understand, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. So if you do have questions, that'll just help everybody get a good understanding. We'll break things down a little bit more. All right, I do have an outline of items that I will be talking about, and then if I can get you to print and sign your name, please. With that also, I do have just a little follow-up survey I'd like us to hand out, so I'll get that to you. So, any questions so far? Okay. First page might be a little grainy on the screen, but you do have a handout in front of you. Again, this is your copy to keep, so if you do want to take some notes on it, feel free to do so. I do have a pile of them here. I'll leave them here as well with you when I leave. Introduction. Information in this manual is for operation and maintenance of this aerial. The intent is to instruct operators in the proper operation of this equipment and to warn of improper procedures and potentially dangerous situations. Only personnel who are totally familiar with this manual and have training are qualified to operate this aerial. It is the responsibility of the department owning this equipment to permit only qualified personnel to operate this aerial. Pierce Manufacturing provides the services of a delivery technician before the unit is placed into service to train the department's personnel in the safe and proper method of operation. The name of each trainee is recorded as proof of participation in the training. It is the department's responsibility to provide future training and qualification documentation and qualify its operators. Qualified drivers of other fire apparatus will require further training for handling of this aerial. Description of danger, warning, and caution. This safety symbol indicates important safety messages in this manual. When you see the symbol, carefully read the message that follows the symbol. Be alert to the possibility of personal injury or death. Warning labels located on this vehicle and warning statements contained in this manual all use the same terminology to warn of potential hazards. Each of these potentially harmful conditions is described below. A danger, a hazard that will result in death or serious personal injury. A warning, a hazard which might result in death or serious personal injury. And a caution, a hazard which might result in personal injury or damage to property or equipment. So as we are moving throughout the vehicle, I will point out majority of the danger, warning, and caution indicators and talk about them at that time when we are positioned where they are located. In your chassis cab, you do have a command. No, you don't have a command zone display in your chassis cab, so we can disregard that. You do have the velocity chassis. They do have them occasionally, but you do not have one, so we won't have to talk about that. Next page, you have initial warning. You must not operate this device unless you have been trained in the safe operation of this device. You know and follow the safety and operating recommendations contained in the manufacturer's manuals, your employee work rules, and applicable governmental regulations. All personnel on the aerial ladder or platform wearing a safety belt properly attached to the device is being operated within its rated load capacity. All stabilizers are properly deployed on an adequately solid surface. It has been visually inspected for defects before operation and use. Death or serious injury may result if the above precautions are not observed. Pre-driving and truck positioning. Note, the following procedures are intended for safe operation of the aerial. Deviation from these procedures is not recommended. Pre-driving checks. Is the ladder properly stowed in the boom support? Are the stabilizers properly stowed for travel? Is the aerial master switch located in the cab in the off position? And procedure concerned at the scene. Is the unit to be used for water tower operations or as a rescue unit? Take note of overhead obstructions and position the unit for best attack. We do position for operation. We do recommend positioning facing uphill as opposed to facing downhill. Position your unit uphill to the scene, put the transmission in neutral, set the parking brake. There also is a front wheel lock, which is a rocker switch in the right-hand panel. You will engage that front wheel lock. That will apply the brakes to the front steer axle. Turn the aerial master aerial PTO on, you can exit the cab. At that point, we will deploy our wheel chocks. They will go fore and after the front steer axle, as we are going to try to keep the front steer axle contacting the ground. At that point, we'll go to the rear of the truck, fully extend the stabilizer out, put the ground pads down, bring the stabilizers down, contacting the ground. What we are looking for a safe and stable setting is removing enough weight from the rear suspension to take the bulge out of the rear tires, but keeping the tires contacting the ground. So if you're operating, you're looking front to rear with weight on the tires. The radial tire, sidewall will have a bulge in the tire. We're going to activate both controls down, which in turn will raise the truck. Now as we look at the sidewall of the tire, it's nice and straight up and down, but still contacting the surface. If you look at the truck from the side with weight on, again, there'll be a bulge in the tire. We're going to activate both controls down, which will raise the truck. Now as we look at the tires from the side, they're nice and round on the bottom, but still contacting the surface. I want to try to keep as many stable points in contact with the ground whenever possible. That will give us our most stable and smooth operating. If you had a situation where you had a pretty good grade, to get within a safe operating range, you had to raise the rear tires off the ground, yes, you can operate, and you can operate safely. But keep in mind, anytime you break points of contact, you have a possibility of shifting or movement. When that ladder is out and extended, it creates a very long lever. Controls are so in any RPM range, you'll be able to start slowly and stop slowly. But if you start abruptly and stop abruptly, there may be some reaction to the chassis. So again, more stable points of contact would be the best. If you had a crowd in the road and one set of the tires came off again, you would be fine to operate. If you set up positioning facing downhill and you raise the front of the truck so the front steer axle is not on the ground, you operate out over the front cab regions, you have a possibility of teetering on the front stabilizer and wanting to drop down on those front tires. So that's something you do have to keep in mind if you set up with the front tires off the ground. But again, recommended will be position uphill, remove enough weight from the rear suspension, take the bulge out of the rear tire, keep the tires contacting the ground. Questions with that? All right, when we do get outside a little later on, I'll do some demonstration with the setup, show you what we're looking at, how we're going to achieve that, and let each of you operate as well. With that, it says warning, area where the ground pads make contact with the ground must be firm and capable of supporting 75 psi. So again, anytime we put the stabilizer out, always put the ground pads down. You must set up that can maintain 75 psi of pressure. Basically, the stabilizers can put down 75 psi of pressure. The weight of the truck, I'm going to say, is somewhere close to 78 to 80,000 pounds. So when you're operating, you usually operate one side or the other. Look at, you need to support basically that 80,000 pounds by those two stabilizers and ground pads. So they have to be able to support a lot of weight. Recommend a paved driving surface. Anything outside of a paved driving surface, you may not be able to guarantee that can maintain that pressure, or that may deteriorate with, weather, flow of water, that type of thing. So paved driving surface would be recommended. Do not set up over manhole cover, storm drains, underground parking facilities that cannot meet that requirement. And caution, never bridge across ditches, culverts, or any openings with the ground pads. Want to try to keep the truck and the stabilizers on a consistent surface. If you bridge across some type of an opening with the stabilizer, you have a possibility of settling. Once all four are firmly planted, you'll be able to raise the aerial up. Once the aerial is up and operating, the system no longer monitors the stabilizers. So what I mean by that is, let's say you bridge across something, you rotated to this side, and these stabilizers are settling, and the opposite side came free of the ground, the aerial does not stop operating. It is up to the operator, first and foremost, to set up in a firm, stable setting. Always monitor the stabilizers as well as the aerial when the aerial is in there. Then truck can be positioned facing uphill or downhill. Each method has advantages and disadvantages. Neither condition of the truck must be capable of being leveled to within the safe operating limits. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. That would be 3.5 degrees of slope and 5.5 degrees of grade. The area around the unit must be clear for stabilizer extension. Full stabilizer extension is required for unlimited aerial operations. Then again, the area where the stabilizer ground pads make contact with the ground must be firm and capable of supporting 75 psi. Positioning uphill. On maximum grade conditions, the unit should be positioned uphill to the scene for over-the-rear operations. Advantages of positioning uphill. Extending the rear stabilizer jacks will raise the rear of the truck, reducing the grade. In a setup position, the front tires will still be in contact with the ground. Raising rear axles off the ground adds to the truck's ballast weight, offering greater stability. Rear tires can be left on the ground if no grade correction is required to offer more resistance to sliding when greater stability is not a concern. Disadvantages of positioning unit uphill. With the rear tires off the ground, the truck has less resistance to sliding downhill. Because of the added height, access to storage compartments is more difficult. Reaching the ground with the tip of the aerial is difficult off the rear of the truck. And positioning downhill, advantages of positioning unit downhill. Storage compartments are closer to the ground for easier access. All rear tires are in contact with the ground, offering greatest resistance to sliding. It is easier to reach the ground with the tip of the aerial off the rear of the truck. And disadvantage of positioning unit downhill, the stabilizer jacks cannot be extended to reduce the downhill grade without raising the front tires off the ground. Less rear truck ballast weight with the rear tires off the ground. And with that, we'll go on to the next page. And it does say, front tires off the ground can cause improper aerial bedding. Front tires off the ground may cause teetering effect over the front stabilizers when the aerial is used off the front of the truck. And you do have the 4-stabilizer system. Then we have stabilizer setup procedure. Personnel must be familiar with stabilizer setup procedure before positioning stabilizers. We just talked about that. I will do demonstrations and you will also get a chance to operate them. Cab controls are not identical to what you do have, so when we get out to the truck and inside the cab, we'll talk a little bit more about cab controls themselves. But there's a note. Most trucks are equipped with built-in safety interlocks. If either above steps are not followed, the aerial PTO will not engage. Shift transmission to neutral, apply parking brake and front wheel lock. So again, to operate the aerial, transmission neutral, parking brake set, front wheel lock engage, aerial master and PTO, and at that point you can exit the cab.
Why are the front wheel locks not just part of the parking brake system? Just be put on all the time?
The only real explanation I have, somewhere along the way you're going to have to go into repair shop and have front brake work done. And if that thing is applied all the time, they won't be able to work on it. They would have to release the parking brake.
And isn't it two separate braking systems?
It is. Your normal parking brake, when you pull to set, it takes air pressure away and a large spring expands to lock the brakes. The front is actually applied air. So what I'm gonna have you do as an operator, you're gonna turn that switch on and leave it on all the time. When you set the parking brake, it will come on. When you release the parking brake, it will go off. And when you're parked in the station and you turn ignition and battery off, it will release. We do want it to release because it is applied air, just like you'd be stepping on the brake pedal. Basically it has a two-way valve. If you step on the brake pedal, air goes through one way, applies the brakes. If you activate the front wheel lock, it comes through the other way and applies the brakes. So we don't want that applied there all the time when it's parked in the station, so it takes care of itself. But because again, to answer your question, if you do, and when you take the truck in for brake work, you want to turn that switch off, keep that in your mind, turn that off. Now, if they're doing the brake work and they never turn the battery ignition on, they're all right. But if they turn that battery ignition on and they got components apart, things are going to fly and people can get hurt. So that's the main reason for it.
So, moral of the story, don't use the front wheel lock all the time.
No, turn it on and let it take care of itself.
Yeah.
It'll take care of itself. Like I said, when you release the parking brake, it goes off. When you apply the parking brake, it comes on as long as your battery ignition are turned on. And when you turn the ignition and battery off, the park in the station, it will release. Because then you don't need it, because then you got your basically your parking brake set.
So no big deal using it all the time.
No, use it all the time. Just leave it switched on.
Okay.
Whether
Leave it,
you're setting up for aerial or not.
all right, leave it switched on. Because as long as the truck is running, you're going to be out there for, you know, and you're operating. Even if you would only be monitoring, it's just a good idea. You got a big heavy truck, let's keep the brakes locked. You know, in all situations.
We only activate front wheel lock when we are setting up for aerial hours.
Right, right. And that was the process in the past.
Okay.
But now we have it, so basically it can take care of itself. So we're going to turn.
Good.
Yeah.
What's your feeling on, a lot of departments, it's this custom to wheel chock it whenever they park anywhere, out to the store, on a fire, whatever, level ground.
I have to tell you because you have the wheel chocks, you have to use them anytime the truck is parked. Now, per me, you should have them in the station, but I can't control that. But no, anytime that truck is parked, because the wheel chocks are there, they have to be used. So I didn't look if there's two sets or one set.
Yeah, we have
Two, you have two or one?
I think we have two sets.
Okay, if you do have two, you have to use both sets. NFPA requires one set minimum, but if you have two, it's one of those things. If the truck is equipped with them, you have to use them.
Back to the front wheel lock. So come back to the station, turn the truck off, turn the batteries off. When I turn the batteries on, turn the ignition on, is it going to be in the on setting or do I have to?
No, it'll be an on setting, it'll come back on.
Okay, so once it's turned on, you have to turn it off.
You have to turn it off. Okay. Now, we have different styles of switching because we have a computer that's operating. We have a hard toggle, which is like that is, or like a headlight switch. You turn it on, it's off, it's off. Headlight switch, so when you turn the ignition and battery off, it will go off, but because it's hard and turned on, you turn the battery ignition, it will come back on. So this is considered a hard toggle. Once you turn it on, it will stay on. Then you have what we call a soft touch. You push it basically to turn it power on, you push it again to turn it off. When you have loss of power or you turn the truck off, they default to the off position and do not come back on. Then you also have a momentary, which would be like a primer system or your emergency hydraulic power unit. That has to be switched and held continuously. That's the difference between a momentary and a soft. So there's different switching within the system. Hard toggle, they stay on, battery off. Soft touch, they default to the off position. So if you have, say like your lights on from your generator, if you turn your generator off, they go off, they do not come back on when you turn the generator on. That's a safety feature so you don't have that big load when you start it back up again. You would have to re-switch them back on again. So again, we're trying to, system somewhat takes care of its own needs. There's not everything, so sometimes it's like your aerial master and PTO. I do recommend when you're done at the scene, turn them off. But if you forget about them and release the parking brake, they shut themselves off because they're a soft touch. They don't come back on again until you switch them back on, which you would need your neutral and parking brake again for that. Okay, water tower and water pump operations. To engage, note, the engine must be at idle, and we're talking about your midship water pump to engage a pump. Engaging a pump will cause momentary loss of aerial functions. All aerial movement should be stopped before engaging the pump. Basically what they're saying there is when you engage your water pump, you shift the transmission to drive. We've just been talking, the aerial wants to operate in neutral. So there's a possibility you start in neutral, you engage your pump. When you go to drive, it's going to momentarily shut the aerial off, and the computer is going to say, hey, I'm in water pump operations, this truck cannot be moved, I'm going to allow that aerial to operate and drive. So it's probably never going to be a situation, but let's say you were out moving a ladder and you had somebody at the tip of that ladder. It's going to shut off and restart, and then you might be a possibility of a problem with that. So my recommendation would be basically, if you do not have the water pump engaged and you got the aerial operating, communicate, hey, we're going to engage your water pump, stop for that 5 seconds, they engage the pump, you can resume again. It's not a real big deal. It might not be in a situation, but it will momentarily shut the aerial off and then restart it without warning.
So, let's say you've got, the guy that gets out of the cab with the, put your pump in gear, and for whatever reason, you've got the governor set, and you come up and want to move the aerial, will that dead man switch increase RPM if the governor's kicked in? Or
No,
the governor's
no,
pulled
no,
or idle, right?
no.
Or whatever it's-
When the water pump is engaged, all high idles are shut off.
Okay,
Your engine RPM is always controlled by the pump operator station with the pressure controller.
so you could still raise it, it'll just be slower.
Right, right. So in the chassis cab, there's a high idle switch. That is independent of the chassis cab. So if you come to the fire scene and it's a medical call or something, and you're just monitoring, we do recommend turning the high idle on. So you turn the high idle on in the cab, you're going about your business, all of a sudden, hey, now I need to raise this aerial. I don't really have a situation, but you do. When you go into aerial operations, you want to shut the high idle off in the cab and then resume with the high idle within the aerial. The only reason being is if it's turned on in the cab, you cannot turn it on at the aerial. It's going to stay on all the time. You can't control it. They are independent. They don't communicate that way.
So on past trucks, are the high idle setting to operate the hydraulics for the aerial, we know is at 1250 RPM.
This is 1350, but
Okay, so a lot of operators, our truck will operate with the pump engaged at the lower RPM, the aerial will operate, but it's slower. So a lot of our apparatus operators know to set their pump with the RPMs at that speed and just recirculate water, and it makes the aerial operate better. Is that the case with this as well?
it can be. For the most part, between 1 and 2 functions, you don't really see a lot of difference, even at low idle. It's when you go into the 3rd function, you see a difference. So if you're setting, even setting stabilize, you set 2 of them up, you don't notice a lot of difference. Let's say you had 2 operators, one guy on one side, one on the other. Now you're basically operating 4 functions, 2 stabilized piece. Then you're going to see some slowdown. But it's not that drastic. It doesn't slow it down to just a creep. I mean, they slow down a little bit, but it's not that drastic.
John, you'll find that this stick moves real as fast as you want it to go. I mean, it moves out, not like the other one.
So if you go up to 1250 or 1350 with the RPM, that seems, no, but it seems a little excessive. I mean, you're recirculating a lot of water at that point, which, it depends on your time of year. You can be heating that water up and how long you're there, and, there's some things involved there too. So I don't have a direct answer to that. No, probably not, but I'll let you guys kind of guide yourself through that as you operate today, and do different things, see what happens. But with that, again, when the water pump is engaged, all high idles are shut off. If it be in the cab, in the stabilizer, or the aerial, you do have adequate RPM to operate, even at an idle. And when they are operating, also on the other side of that coin, you never get out of range of operating. 1350 is your high idle. Let's say you're pumping at 1550. It's not going to go make any difference at that point. Once you reach that 1350, that's the max. So any higher, you never get out of operating range. But that's not to say that if you grab a control, it's not going to whip a lot more than it would at a low RPM. But the controls are so that you can always nice and easy on, easy off, basically in any RPM.
Okay.
So there won't
So
be
you
a
made
safety
comment
problem.
that you guys recommend the high idle switch activated just on a scene monitoring. Is even with the advent of all the LED lighting that doesn't drain the alternators much, you still think it's important to go?
And a lot of it's due to that engine package. With that DPF regeneration system, keep that engine RPM up.
Okay.
Kind of counterproductive in my thinking,
Never
but
turn it off. What if
but-
it won't start?
Well, now since we've kind of gone off track, that's a trend more now, especially with the new apparatus on medical calls, is we just turn the thing off or hazards on.
I mean, that's the other, you know, yeah. It's either on at high idle or turned off. I don't have a problem turning it off.
Okay, I mean, just the noise, it's amazing just that it changes the scene on a medical call, or even, if the road's shut down. it could
Well,
be-
I mean, that's like when we go into bedding of the aerial, I always recommend turning the high idle off. They say you got the high idle on, that engine's roaring a little more on edge, you just kind of slow down and focus on bringing it down in. So, not that you can't, but.
Okay, we're getting off, but.
No, you're
you know,
fine.
So we've run hot to a call, your turbo's whining and spinning at a bazillion RPMs. I've always been taught, you wanna let that thing cool down a little bit, so don't just shut it off.
Yeah.
Go ahead and let it idle for a while.
I believe if you got into your actual engine manufacturer's manuals, they would say to let it idle for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't think most people do,
No.
you know. You drive that truck back from a call, you back it in, you shut it off.
Well, but coming back from a call, it's usually more gentle driving.
Right,
you know,
right.
and probably, but, yeah, okay.
But still, you know, that thing is hot.
Oh, yeah.
The engine, you're not, you're not putting the accelerator to the floor, but everything's up to operating temperatures. It's hot at that point.
And these are extremely hot, it's new engine.
Right.
Fancy.
That's
Okay.
how it remains more efficient because of the amount of heat. Okay, one more thing with the water pump. When the water pump is engaged, you need to recirculate water. So as soon as you engage the water pump, you need to pull the tank to pump valve and the tank fill. I think you have a recirculating line, which would be adequate. I'm kind of old school that way. I pull the tank pump all the way out. I pull the tank fill a quarter of the way and lock it in place. And that's how I operate it. Once I get to operating, once we get a hydrant established, we're going to be spilling water on the ground. That has to happen too. You still need to recirculate water until you open a discharge other than that tank fill. At that point, I close the tank fill. I always leave because the tank's full now, I always leave my tank to pump valve open.
And isn't that recirc line only a 1/4 inch line?
It's actually a 1/2 inch line.
Half-inch line?
Yeah, which would be adequate for a short period of time, but eventually you could heat that up just because that, and if that would be the situation, you don't want a real high RPM because the higher RPM, the more heat you're going to create when you recirculate that water as well. So there's a lot of variables. I say I don't know what your situation is, but I know there's a lot of places when it's cold out, if it's 32 or below, they automatically recirculate water. So I mean, they could be sitting out there half hour, 45 minutes, and who knows how long recirculating water, and that's not always a real good thing either. So. All right, and as we move down, the note, engine must be at idle to engage the pump. Engaging the pump will cause momentary loss of aerial functions. All aerial movement should be stopped before engaging the pump. That's where this whole conversation started. Then check the parking brake, it must be on. Check transmission, it must be neutral. Push pump shift down to engage the pump. Place transmission in drive. Refer to water pump manufacturer's operations manual for more detailed information. I don't have one here, but we also have water pump operators manuals. Two of those did come with the truck as well. So if you need additional information on operating the water pump, engaging the water pump, locate those manuals as well and read through those. And then the note, high idle control will be deactivated and the water pump will control the engine throttle. During pump operation, engine RPM is sufficient to operate all aerial functions. Safe operating limits. Note, angle indicators are located at the rear of the apparatus. So you have your bubble levels or your inclinometers at the rear, one for side to side of slope, one for front to rear grade. Safe operating angles at full load when the unit is set up. When we're talking full load, we are referencing your tip load of the aerial, and that is 500 pounds. So provided you set up from 0 to 3.5 degrees, side to side of slope, you have full rated capacity. If you set up from 0 to 5.5 degrees, front to rear grade, you have full capacity, or full 500 pounds. Then we have safe operating angles at 50% load capacity. 3.5 to 5.5 degrees, side to side of slope, half your rated load capacity of your ladder. And then you can operate from 5.5 to 6.5 of grade, front to rear, with half your rated capacity. So when you look at your inclinometer or bubble level, if you are in a green operating range, you're safe. Once that bubble or ball contacts the yellow, you need to go with half your operating range. If it contacts the red, stop, reposition, or do not operate at that point.
Does the truck know?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It's up to you.
I mean, it's
The
like
operator is always responsible, so no, that truck does not know.
our, just a lot of our roads, just the crown of the road would put you into that parameter pretty quickly.
Right. So, but you should be able to operate you should have a minimum of 3.5 degrees of operating. We'll take a look and see how much we actually got there. You may have the extended stabilizers because of your, conditions here. You might have a little bit more operation than that. It might be closer to 5 degrees, but 3.5 degrees is more than adequate to take up your crown in the road and then some, yeah. Then stabilize deployment. Set the wheel chocks in place in back of the front wheels if facing uphill, in front of the rear wheels if facing downhill. Always place the wheel chocks where they will give the most resistance to truck's movement. Check the aerial master switch is in the on position and aerial PTO indicator light located in the cab is lit. Hydraulic power should be available and the engine should be at low idle. All right, wheel chocks. When you deploy your wheel chocks, if you're on level ground or positioning uphill, put the rear wheel chock tight against the front steer axle. Leave the front one an inch or two away. Reason being is if you have them both tight, a little bit of shifting tends to suck them in further where you can't get either of them out. If you keep them both away, they might not do you any good. If you are positioned uphill and the truck does slide or move, it just might push that wheel chock away. Now, what I'm going to recommend too is if you have a pretty good grade uphill, put both rear ones tight, go back in the cab, cover the brake and release the parking brake and just let the unit roll up onto those so they're dug in so they cannot be pushed away. So if you had any type of movement, it doesn't push that wheel chock away, but they're locked in tight. Now, you may have to roll the truck off that rear one, but if you leave the front one a little ways away, you will be able to pull that one free. Okay, next page. Danger. Stabilizers must be the full extension for full rotation capability of the aerial unit. Do not take aerial over the center line of chassis using the manual control levers. If the stabilizer beams on that side are not a full extension, unit may become unstable and upset. We're going to talk about short jack limit in just a little bit here. I like to talk about basically the overrides and emergency procedures at this point. We do have overrides, manual controls for the stabilizers as well as the aerial. Rotation limit, we have overrides for them as well. We have numerous electronic components, basically what we call proximity switches. That's what does the sensing to tell you if the stabilizers are down, if the ladder's in the bed, if the stabilizers are not the full extension for all your safeties. If one of those fail, you have to be able to get the ladder back into the bed, stabilizers up and in. So if one of those do fail, is a possibility you may have to use an override or a manual control. Keep in mind those overrides or manual controls are there to get you back to a safe condition, to get out of trouble, not into trouble. But once you activate an override, as well as allowing you to go to the safe condition, it allows you to go to an unsafe condition. So be certain you are operating them appropriately. Most of them are in position where it takes 2 people to operate them. So when you are doing that, make sure you are communicating that everybody's on the same page. All right. Then caution, never bridge across ditches, culverts, or any openings with the ground pads. Again, we talked about that. May promote settling of the stabilizers. Next warning, stand clear of stabilizers to avoid crushing injury. Anytime you activate a stabilizer control switch, you will have an alarm. That is the indicator to you as an operator as well as anybody else around the vehicle the stabilizers are moving. Avoid being crushed by them. And for trucks with 4 stabilizers, to avoid having to re-level the unit, level the low side of the apparatus before leveling the high side. On level ground, extend either side first. Preferred setup is an uphill position with the rear stabilizer supporting enough weight to remove the bulge from the rear tires. Front stabilizers should be firmly planted on the ground, but leaving the front suspension compressed, allowing for full aerial operation. Actual ground conditions may necessitate deviation from this preferred setup. When positioning uphill, raise the rear of the truck until the truck is level. Front stabilizers should be set until they are firm on ground. When positioning downhill, raise the front of the truck until the truck is level. Rear stabilizers should be set until they're firm on ground and begin to lift the truck. Some tires should remain in contact with the ground whenever possible. This will give added resistance to sliding. So when we do our stabilizer setup, we will bring the high side stabilizer out, put the ground pads down, and just touch those pads on the ground, or stabilize on those pads on the ground. we will bring the low side out, again, ground pads down, put those stabilizers down, contacting the ground. At that point, we will set the low side, taking the bulge out of the tire, the weight off the suspension, and then set the high side. The reason we bring the high side stabilizer out and touch it, we want to pivot or transfer our weight off the stabilizer system as opposed to the tires and suspension. So we don't want to put a lot of pressure on the tires and suspension. We're going to use that stabilizer torque box system. The torque box, basically, you open your rear compartment storage door, you have your ladder pike pull storage, you're going to see a large tube, the rear stabilizer attached to that, and then the front. That creates a very rigid frame for supporting the weight of the unit with the stabilizer system. So we want to use that for that transfer and support of weight as opposed to the tires and suspension. So high side out touch, low side touch, set low side taking the bulge out of the tire, set high side taking the bulge out of the tire. Now anytime we operate two, we want to try to operate two stabilizers at a time, bring the unit up nice and consistently. Because of that torque box system, it's a very rigid frame. So if you operate a one stabilizer in the front, you might twist the truck around, and now you might have a stabilizer free, and now you try to set this one and you twist it around and you're chasing that all the way around the truck. So if you operate two at a time, keeps it moving nice and consistently and evenly. Just makes it more efficient way of setting up.
These are engineered to the speed is pretty much identical.
It is once they start to take weight. Because we're going to show you here in a little bit, your manual controls or your main control valve bank, hydraulic valve, is in the rear. So naturally the hoses going to the front are longer, they move a little bit slower. But once it starts to take weight, basically they catch up with each other, and once the pressure has to increase, and then they move pretty evenly. So when you initially put them out there, the front moves a little bit slower. But once you get them both contact and they take weight, they move pretty consistently.
Question about ditches. And when you say bridging, like I'm imagining the stabilizer going over a ditch or something like that. It doesn't happen very often, but on occasion where we have to set up, we will use cribbing and crib underneath the stabilizer. Don't do that with
Don't do
this
that.
rig? Okay.
The reason being is I have to say no, I can't control that consistency. I have no idea. Years back, I worked in our refurbishment area, and we brought some, we would do anything and everything as far as a truck. We would get, well, this is a little bit old, we would get an old unit, and probably from the mid to late 70s, because everything was steel back then and everything rusted away real quick, so we would replace it with aluminum components. But anyway, we could get, say, a 1975 Seagrave, we would redo that thing complete, and it would come out the other end being a brand new Pierce. So, but anyway, along the way, we had a lot of chassis and heavy aerials and stuff like that. But we were rolling one time, and it kind of got away as it was somewhat of a grade. We had big, like 6x6 blocks of wood. You put them underneath them tires, and that weight and that pressure, them things would just splinter and explode, and it rolled right back over the top of it. So we didn't have to move it far. We had it on a chain wherever we could control it, but we just wanted to stop it. So after that, we ended up making some great big steel type wheel chocks that we knew would be able to stop it if the thing kind of did get away on us a little bit. But so that's the reason you can't, with that type of weight, there's just no way to guarantee that that's going to be adequate to support it. So we recommend ground pads on a paved driving surface is going to be recommended. Now, anything outside of that, on the sheet, the sign-in sheet, there's an area on there, it just says judgment call. And we have our Pierce recommendations, basically, is everything in here that's black and white. Anything out there becomes a judgment call. You have to base that on, your experience, your skill level, your knowledge. I can't tell you to do that. I have to recommend against it. But that's what a judgment call is. And I don't know if you read it or not before you signed it, but there's one spot that just mentioned that. That's like overrides too. I have to say, hey, overrides always back to get you back to safe condition. If you pulled an override and you went to an unsafe condition, that's your decision based on your experience. I cannot give you that recommendation to do that. I have to say not to. All right. And you do not have the safety pins for your stabilizers. All hydraulic cylinders, if it be the stabilizers or within the aerial system, have safety valves or holding cartridges. Once you operate the hydraulic system, moves in position. When you release that function, that hydraulic system pressure is locked. So basically it's a hydraulic lock. The stabilizers cannot move as well as the aerial cannot move. So basically if you had pins, it would be the same system with a redundant safety. Okay, next page. Short jacking on one side. On occasion, it may be necessary to set up in a confined space where the stabilizers cannot be extended on one side. Operation shall and will be limited to the side where the stabilizers are fully extended. On the short jack side, it will be necessary to extend the beam far enough. You do not have the safety pin, but we do want to get them out as far as possible. If aerial operation is attempted on the unsafe side, the aerial will automatically stop. So if you have a situation where you know you're not going to be able to get all 4 stabilizers out and down and planted, the side of the truck you're operating on, those 2 will need to be fully extended. So we're going to say you need to operate on my left side. Position the truck where you can get both left side stabilizers out, down and planted, removing the bulge from the rear tire. Opposite side, do get them out as far as possible, down and planted, removing the bulge from the tire. Once all 4 are planted, you'll be able to raise the aerial up. If you attempt to rotate to the short side, it automatically stops you, does not allow you to go there. But you do have full operating on the side that is fully extended. Again, once you come to the short side off the other side, it would stop you again. If a stabilizer is not fully extended, it is considered short. So let's say you had a car parked and you could get it all but 3 inches from full extension. Basically, it's short. You have no operation to that side. It's full out for full operating or nothing. So with that, if you had a situation where you could not get the stabilizers out at all, let's say you had a curb like you have right here, you could drop them right straight down, get the bulge out of the tire, make sure the green indicator light is on. Those 2 will need to be fully out and extended, and you wouldn't be able to operate safely. Okay, with that, if you have a situation where maybe you just need to get the cab up in the air, or you want to get up on top,
Load hose.
don't use an override, just drop them straight down so you get all 4 indicator lights, and then you can do it. So if you don't want to have to bring them all the way out, I just run a lot of situations, well, we're not going to go anywhere, we'll just raise with the override and leave it sit there. That's not a good practice. Besides that, there's a lot of pressure when them stabilizers on the ground on the front of that chassis frame and components up in front there. So yeah, you could just drop them straight down, get your green lights. At that point, you'll be able to raise the aerial up. As long as you are not using any overrides, I or Pierce don't have a problem with it. So when you use overrides, it could have a potential dangerous condition.
You gotta load the hose bed with hose, so you can just do that, raise the stick.
Raise the
load
stick,
the hose.
sure. It's not gonna let you rotate anyway. You still could actually extend the retract and raise and lower, you just couldn't rotate. As long as you were set up safely. I ran into a situation where they had some kind of a type of an alleyway, and basically they couldn't get anything out, stabilize out. So they would drive it in, get them out as far as possible. You could raise the ladder up in the air, extend the retract. You actually get about 3 degrees, so you got a little bit of movement up there if you did need to adjust. But the system itself does not let you get into this unsafe condition unless you activate an override.
Back to the scenario like you're describing here, let's say you had the choice of short jacking on paved surface or going over that curb onto grass with pads, but you would not be short jacked. You certainly wouldn't be as firm a ground.
I'd-
Possibility you'd operate that way, you better probably not.
Yes, I would put them on the pavement.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be a difference. Keep that in mind. The weight of that stabilizer does carry some ballast when you got that ladder out there. So you will notice a difference, especially if you are quite a ways extended at a low elevation. If you were at a high elevation, not so much, because it creates more of a back pressure condition. But the beam itself does carry some ballast. So even though you were not going to go out to this side, do get them out as far as possible. Now again, this scenario here, I'd recommend the pavement as opposed to the grass. But let's say we were 3 feet away where we could get them just about all the way out. I would bring them out and down on the pavement as opposed to leaving them all the way in. You know, you couldn't go there either way, but again, that beam carries some ballast out when you're out there. So I'm hoping all this stuff isn't messing up your video here. It's as far as people in the future might not have the, you know, same skill base as along the way, so they understand what's going on. All right, before proceeding, be sure the unit is set up to within safe operating limits. Again, the 3.5 degrees of slope, 5.5 degrees of grade, and you do not have the safety pins. Always put your ground pads down before setting the stabilizers. Before you leave the scene, remember to put them back in the holder when you do leave. Okay. You don't have safety pins, but you got the ground pads. You don't have to worry about the pins. It won't damage anything there, but. Okay, warning, personnel ladder should wear safety belts at all times. Anytime you are positioned on the ladder, you need a safety belt to harness, always attached to what we consider a structural piece of the ladder, which would be a climbing rung, sidebar lacing, possibly a top rail. Do not attach a miscellaneous bracketry, other equipment out there, cables, that type of thing. Always structural piece of the ladder. Okay, you do not have the optional tip controls. We do have an option to have aerial functions at the tip of the ladder. You do not have those, but you do have controls at the tip of the ladder for your water flow or monitor positioning. Those are there. Next page. Warning, electrocution hazard. Personnel not involved with aerial operations stand clear. And electric storms can pose a serious hazard to anyone on or near the aerial unit. User discretion is advised. The controls themselves for the turntable we'll talk about when we get out to the truck. So with that, we'll go to the next page. Tell you what, we're going to take a 5-minute break right here. Get up, move around a little bit. Okay. On this page, you have a list of warnings, and the first one is, an operator must be stationed at the turntable controls at all times during any aerial operation. This primary operator is responsible for observing all operations and warning or overriding any potentially dangerous condition or movement of the secondary tip operator. So anytime the aerial is out of the boom support, we do recommend a person positioned at the turntable controls at all times. They will monitor the stabilizers we've been talking about, as well as monitor the aerial. They do have override capability of the secondary tip operator, basically in this situation, just for the monitor controls. So if you're operating a water flow monitor from the tip of the ladder, the turntable operator can activate a control. It will stop the movement and move in the direction you commanded. So the turntable operator does have override capabilities. During operation, continue to monitor aerial loading and restrict additional loading or any operation that may exceed the limits as shown on the load chart. A couple pages we'll talk about the load chart. Load chart designates the amount of weight you can have positioned on the ladder for structural instability limitations. Do not extend or retract ladder sections with personnel standing on ladder sections, as legs and feet may be jammed between the rungs. So anybody positioned on the ladder at any point, do not extend or retract. Aerial is designed for positive loads. Do not set the aerial on the ground, roof, etc. Any aerial loading or operating of the lowering control while the aerial is in this condition could cause backbending, negative load to aerial sections, and may cause serious damage. Ladder fully extended, there's a pretty good bowl in the ladder. If you're moving up and down or on and off the ladder, it will move, it will deflect. Always keep the ladder at any point 10 or 12 inches away from anything it may contact. Do not rest it down at any point. If it's resting down and you activate a lower control, you will backbend the ladder and damage the ladder. Or if it's possibly resting down at any point and you move people up and down the ladder, you may also create a backbend. The operator is responsible for knowing the condition of the aerial device before operating. This should include a quick visual scan of, but not limited to, pins, cables, cylinders, loose equipment on the ladder, etc. Be familiar with the operation of the stabilizers as well as the condition. Be familiar with the operation of the ladder or the aerial as well as the condition. If you are not 100% sure, stop and do not operate. So if you see something that's like, hey, that nut looks loose or something, you need to get that thing tightened. Find out what it should be before you continue to operate. It's also a good idea to do visual inspection of the ladder. Extend the ladder out, walk down the top of the ladder, look at cable jam nuts, shiv retainer clips, miscellaneous bracketry, electric harnessing, items mounted on the ladder at the tip of the ladder, so you are familiar with those items. Again, if not sure, 100% sure about the operation or condition, do not operate. You have a safety chains or man saver bars. What we got up there?
Man savers.
Okay. You have the man saver bars, so when you are positioned at the turntable, always keep your doors closed behind you. We will be up there as a group today. Do not accidentally step off. If the aerial contacts high voltage power source, do not touch the truck and the ground at the same time. Depending on the situation, the operator may still be able to move the aerial away from the hazard. Use your own discretion. So you may be able to move it away, but again, you have to use your own discretion. So, but normally, if you can move it away from the power line, try to do so. Personnel on ladder should wear safety belts at all times. When fighting fire with the aerial, never work over the roof of the building. Danger of roof ventilating could be a serious hazard to those on the aerial. When using the aerial for rescue operations, try to approach victims from above to avoid victims jumping down on the aerial, which can cause an overload. So if possible, try to avoid shocking the ladder by anybody jumping onto it or abrupt movements while operating. We'll make your rescue. Always position a tip for easy access. When using the aerial in extreme cold conditions, be aware of the possibility of ice buildup. Excessive ice buildup may cause overload or damage to the aerial. Caution, while flowing water, it is recommended that any aerial retraction be performed at a slow speed to avoid excessive water pressure. Maximum water flow through the water pipe is 1,000 gallons per minute. Maximum pressure is 250 psi. If you need to retract while flowing water, do it very slowly. So do not overpressure the pipe or you could damage it. Changing to low engine speed while operating multiple controls will reduce the speed of the aerial operation and may cause unexpected movement. Lowering of the aerial below horizontal in front zones may cause crushing damage to the body equipment of the aerial. Note, for single control lever operation, low engine speed is sufficient for acceptable performance. For optimum performance or multiple control lever operation, the engine high idle switch should be activated. Using the engine high idle will provide the maximum hydraulic flow for any combination of aerial operations. And again, you do not have the tip controls. On the next page, we're going to go down to where it says quick lock waterway operation. Okay, quick lock waterway. What that's going to allow us to do, with the ladder fully extended, we can have the water flow monitor and controls come all the way out with the tip of the ladder. Or, ladder completely retracted, we can reposition them, and now when we extend out, they will stay one section back with the upper mid. So the water flow monitor as well as the water pipe at the tip of the ladder, you don't have it underneath there, it will be one section back. So if you need to get closer to a roof line or window or whatever, you're not going to have that water flow monitor and pipe positioned. That could be in your way, we could damage it. Okay.
Rescue mode.
Okay.
Switch it.
I was going to say, you may call that rescue mode, and when it's full out to the fly, you may call it fire.
Yeah.
So basically, to change the positioning, the ladder needs to be completely retracted, as close to horizontal as possible, and unpressurized. You're going to lift. Let's go to the next page. So basically, if it were in fire mode, the link would be to the front, it'd be locked over center to the front. So if you want to change it to rescue, you're going to lift the handle up in a neutral position. This operates a cam, and there's a link attached to the cam. So to go to the rescue mode, you would rotate the link back to the rear and then lock your handle over center to the rear. That would be in rescue mode. So you can extend, retract, flow water at that position if need be. Put the ladder in the bed, no problem. It'll be fine there. Again, if you want to change the positioning, you need to be retracted, close to horizontal, unpressurized. Again, you raise the handle up to the center position, which will operate the cam, freeing the link. Rotate the link back to the rear hook, or front hook, sorry. When it is to the front, you lock your handle over center to the front. It needs to be locked in one position or the other at all times. If you extend or retract without it locked in, it can't come off the guide track. It could damage the waterway system or other components. If it's not locked in one position or another and you pressurize the waterway pipe, it's going to shoot that pipe right out of there. So it's pretty critical that it's locked in one position or the other.
Did you see what happened at an assistant chief?
Yeah, I heard that. I heard it, yeah. That was a couple of years ago, but yeah.
Did that in a million tries.
Yeah.
There's an arcade ladder that wasn't pinned. No, they didn't have a pin near your spot. They charged for waterway. The whole last fly section of the ladder launched a few hundred feet.
Ladder or
The whole thing. Wide pipe and ladder.
wow.
Hit him in the back and killed him.
So it needs to be locked in one position or the other at all times. So with that, the warning. Do not attempt to change attachment location of the quick lock waterway when the aerial waterway is pressurized. Do not pressurize the aerial waterway at any time when the connecting link is not securely connected to one of the hooks. A pressurized aerial waterway can cause the waterway to move suddenly and violently, causing bodily injury and severe damage to the aerial device. And caution, do not extend or retract the aerial device when the connecting link is not securely fastened to one of the hooks. Quick lock waterway bracket can come off the guide track, resulting in damage to waterway system or other components. All right.
Can that be reached from the front bumper, or do you need to get up on top and do that?
You need to get up on top to do that.
Something tall, yeah.
I mean, it's possible you might be able to reach it, but you're probably better off at top. So
Perhaps they haven't engineered an electronic switch if you do it from the turntable or down the bottom.
we haven't. We've we do have an electric switch that, well, it's a system where if it's not locked in one position or the other, it's going to let you know that. Or
It's actually doing it.
right, no, we don't have anything that actually does it. Or if it's not locked in a proper position, you can't bring the ladder down in the boom support.
yeah.
There's different things that it stops you from, but no, this particular system doesn't have it. Okay, we're going to go into our load chart. Load chart designates the amount of weight you can have positioned on the ladder for structural and stability limitations. So it's going to tell us our weight distribution as far as possibility of the truck tipping over or collapse of the ladder. And it starts out 105-foot aerial ladder, load chart, danger, do not exceed load limits. Do not attempt to operate the apparatus unless you've had proper training and read and understand the operator's manual. Serious injury or death may occur. All weight applied to the E-graph lift eyes must be subtracted from the rated ladder capacity. See E-graph lift eye optional. If you do any type, do you have the actual lifting bar? There's a white bar that goes into the egress with an eyelet in the center?
No, we do not.
You don't think,
For the tip of that?
for the tip, yeah?
Yeah, no, I don't think we have that.
Okay,
There's no eyelet on there.
be right back. This is real quick. Okay, no, there isn't an eyelet there, but you still have lifting capability with the tip of the ladder if you choose to use it that way. So what you could do is sling some type of a strap over, okay? If you do that at any point, you have to make sure you're always picking from the center of the ladder, and it's got to be a complete straight pull. So what I mean, right, nothing where you torque it from side to side. So let's say you had a big web strap, you put it down to the center, you had some roping, whatever, and you had a Stokes basket. Basically, a straight pull, you bring this over, Stokes basket down, put your patient in, straight pull up. So that weight of that rigging, Stokes basket, and that person in it has to be subtracted from that 500-pound tip load. That's what we're talking about.
We also have to go, not just the breakaway bar, but into the actual ladder.
No.
Can you use just the breakaway bar?
It's not considered a breakaway, so I want to clarify that because that's on the video right now, okay? Right, no, it is smaller in structure. If you do contact that, we're hoping that becomes damaged and not the white sections of the ladder, but it is not considered breakaway. It does carry the same structural integrity as the rest of the ladder, so you still have your 500-pound tip load. So no, you could strap over that. We do all our testing, our weight testing with a strap on that egress, so that's where you want to use. But you could, I guess if you did get into the white section of the ladder, would be all right, but you should be fine out on the egress. Okay, then warning. All Pierce units are stability tested before leaving our facility. Any changes or additions in equipment, lighting changes, additions, equipment changes, additions to the aerial device once a unit has left Pierce requires the unit to be retested at our facility, or the additional weight added to must be removed from the unit's allowable tip load. It is the dealer's responsibility to ensure that the customer is aware that any additional weight added to an aerial device must be taken off the load chart. Now we talk stability testing. Basically, you have a 500-pound tip load. We put a strap over the egress, like I said, and we have basically, it's like a weight stack, like a weight machine for lifting weights. We pin the appropriate weight, we pick it up, extend it out, rotate that 360 degrees around the truck to make sure it's not going to tip over. That's our stability test.
So I got a picture just to show you right now how we would rig it. So we have two straps that's longer than we would normally rig it, but they're grabbing the egress, as you called it.
Right.
Is that
Would be
adequate?
fine.
Okay.
Sure, that'd be fine. But again, this weight of this whole thing has to be subtracted from that 500 pounds, as well as when we get into it, each person on the tip of the ladder or being supported is a minimum of 250 pounds. So if you have somebody in that Stokes, they're minimum 250. If they exceed 250, yes, you have to allow with that. But again, maximum tip load will be 500 pounds with everything combined. So So let's go to the next page, and that's actually going to get us to that actual load chart. Now, there's a load chart positioned at the turntable for the turntable operator, as well as an inclinometer for degree of elevation so that they can monitor. The 105-foot steel aerial ladder load chart, 500-pound rated tip load. Waterway dry up to 50-mile-an-hour wind condition. Right now the waterway is dry. If there is water in the pipe, we have to allow for the weight. Right now it is dry. We can go down below grade to -8 and up to 9 degrees. So if we look at this first column, it says -8 up to 9 degrees. So the ladder is always calibrated fully extended. So let's say we got the ladder fully extended and we're operating at about 5 degrees of elevation. Maximum weight to the tip of the ladder or the egress is 500 pounds. We always reduce our load in a 250-pound increment. So again, each person is rated at a minimum of 250. So, section of the ladder, fully extended out, orange tip, reddish orange tip is the egress. The smallest section that's attached to the egress is considered the fly. As we continue towards the rear, towards the turntable, we have our upper mid, lower mid, and then the base section is attached to the turntable, does not move in and out as we talk about the sections. So we're fully extended, 5 degrees. All the way out to the tip of the ladder, we can have 500 pounds or 2 people. The way we read the load chart is that 500 or 2 people can move down the ladder to where you see a dash, which means no additional allowance. Fly, upper mid, lower mid, or the base. But as we continue across, we could never bring a lower weight higher. So right now, again, we're parked 5 degrees, fully extended, 500 pounds on the ladder. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with that 500 pounds at the turntable. I should say on the ground up to the turntable. Again, because the weight can move down the ladder, that 500 pounds or 2 people could start walking up the ladder. They could be positioned anywhere along the way or be all the way out onto the egress. So we're going to go to 10 to 19 degrees. Again, the 500 pounds can come down the ladder of those 2 people, but we can never move the 250 any higher than you see it. So now we have a possibility of 3 people.
As long as one's on the base.
Right, as long as one doesn't go any higher in the base. So again, we're at 10 to 19 degrees, so let's say we're at 15 degrees now, fully extended. The higher we get, the more weight distribution, so we get a little bit extra weight capability. So now we have possibility of 3 people, all 3 up to the turntable. Because the higher weights can come down, we could have all 3 on the base. But as you said, as you leave the base and continue up, we only have a possibility of 500 pounds. This person cannot go any higher than the end of the base section. The additional 2 could be positioned on lower mid, upper mid, fly, all the way out to the egress, are redistributed anywhere down the ladder. Good with that? Okay, let's go down to the waterway charge, 50-mile-an-hour wind condition. Again, anytime we have water in the water pipe, we have to allow for the weight of the water. So it does start out -8 to 9 degrees, 500 pounds. We go over to 10 to 19 degrees. It still stays at 500 pounds. We have lost the 250-pound increment. So note there is a difference in the condition. We have to allow for the weight of that water. When there is water flowing out of the tip of the ladder, it's pretty obvious there's water in the pipe. If you shut the water off at the pump source and the pipe is standing full of water, note the water is in there. You have to allow for that weight. So it does change. There's a drain at the rear of the truck. You can open the drain, wait a minute or so, let the pipe drain, and we'll be back to empty again. Give you a little bit more capacity, but do note the condition of the pipe. And then again, reduced loads at the tip can be redistributed in 250-pound increments to the fly section, upper mid, lower mid, and base sections as needed. Capacity are based on the following conditions. Apparatus is set up according to operator's manual and leveled to within safe operating limits. So we did talk about that. Ladder is fully extended and unsupported. You have 360 degrees continuous rotation. For icing condition, refer to operator's manual. Rated vertical height is 105 feet. That is measured from the ground to the tip of the ladder, full extension, full elevation. So with that, your rated reach or horizontal reach at 0 degrees would be 100 feet, 7 inches. Up to 45 degrees, you reach 70 feet, 8 inches, and at 75 degrees, you reach 25 feet, 6 inches. You do have unlimited nozzle monitor positioning, flowing up to 1,000 gallons of water per minute. Next page does talk about icing conditions. Let's see here.
So with the ladder fully extended in its steepest position, how many degrees?
75 degrees.
That's as steep as it will go.
Right, right.
So these capacities are all based on fully extended. What if you're only half extended?
it becomes safer. You do not get any additional capacities.
Okay, yeah, they're not gonna say, well, you can fudge more.
Right, no.
Which you physically could, but they're not gonna tell you that.
I can't tell you that.
You know, and these elevation degrees are very, I mean, like, we're really gonna need to know these because, most of the time, we're not up at 70 to 75, so we need to pay attention because we're down at these lower degrees.
Right, but you're a lot of times in that 30 to 40 degree range. You might be sometimes lower, but if you get up in that 30 to 40 degree range, you get pretty good capabilities. Because when we look at that 500 pounds, that's the egress. That's that red section.
Yeah.
Chances are you really don't have anybody on there.
Right.
So now that transfers back to the fly section. So now you have I'm in the wrong chart here because I changed my page. So now you basically brought that down to the fly. So if you started 30 degrees, move that 500 down to the fly. Now you got 2 people on the fly, 1 person on the upper mid, 1 on the lower mid, and 2 on the base. Or you could move that down. So if you're doing any type of a rescue situation, chances are you wouldn't have more than 1 person out there to begin with. So if you had 1 person out there helping them get on the ladder, you would have 1 person on each section, or possibly 2 as you move down from that. So. Yeah, and you know, it's where you get into those lower elevations, and it's possible you might, but I mean 30 degrees is about right up here, and that's like a 2-story structure.
Yeah, well, we ladder 1 stories.
Oh no, you possibly could. Like I say, when you get down there, then you got to be a little bit more concerned. But if you get up on a 2-story, and if you're on a single-story structure, the chance of having multiple people out there, I mean, it lessens. You know, if you got a higher structure, you got an opportunity to have more people out there. It seems. I mean, it could be a residence, but it could be something else. And, you know, there's going to be more people. So. Okay, let's go to that icing condition chart then. Let's start out danger. Operating an aerial device with ice buildup is very dangerous. Extreme caution must be used to prevent overloading an aerial device. Capacity shown on ice condition load chart are based on a uniform coating of ice on the exposed surfaces. The operator must be aware of the condition of the area. Large buildups of ice near the tip can rapidly lead to an unstable condition. So basically we're looking at 0 to 1/4 inch of ice. If you have ice buildup on the ladder, you need to allow for the weight. If you exceed 1/4 inch, we do not want you to operate it. So we look at 105-foot aerial ladder, 500-pound tip load, ice condition, starts out. Waterway dry, 50-mile-an-hour wind condition, starts out at 450-pound, no additional allowance, goes up to 500-pound, no additional allowance, and you can see how it does increase. So, but when you are down to waterway charge, 50-mile-an-hour wind condition, here's where you see the drastic change. Goes from 250 to 300 to what? To 350, and then up to 500 once you get up to that 30-degree mark again. So, keep that in mind if that ever does happen.
So in parts of the country where it gets really cold and you set up and you're flowing water and the spray starts icing up the apparatus, is there a point where you physically can't retract and bed that thing because of ice buildup? And what do? Do they heat guns, chip it off? Is there procedures to get those things?
Not exactly. I heard a situation where they were able to lower the ladder down without retracting it. They got big tarps over it, put torpedo heaters underneath it enough to melt it off. One situation was close enough to the airport, they got the icing equipment over to clean it off. So we don't really have a recommendation. Not as far as hammers or chipping, that we got to try to stay away from. But, you know, I mean, I've heard too already where it was starting to crystallize on there and they were able to do some extending and retracting and keep it from, you know, it would flake off as they were going, right, before it got real bad. It wasn't a situation where, I mean, it was just like a heavy downpour or something, you know, and at that yet, majority of the time you're coming from a heated environment. Once you start to have hydraulic oil, it starts to warm up, so some of the components may be warm. Your groundwater is probably at 55 degrees. That may not freeze as quickly, so if you can do some type of moving along the way, you might be able to prevent it. But I'm sure you've seen the pictures too. We're talking about the metal ladder. You've seen the pictures where that ladder's just sitting out there and it's just covered in ice, and I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do.
Are the aluminum aerial ladder charts different than steel?
They are. They are. Not considerably, but they are different. They are different. Okay, I put some other options in here, like a life pulley system, just because if I had one that did it. We'll go on beyond that. As long as we were talking about the capability of lifting or supporting with the tip of the ladder. So what I mention is, if you do, well, you basically just had a sling right on the tip of the ladder.
Yeah.
Okay. If you had a situation where you were going to use a rope over the ladder, as long as it goes up over the ladder, down the rungs, and is attached to the ladder, it's considered as part of the ladder. You have a 500-pound tip load. If you have a redirect,
That's bad.
well, it basically, you have a possibility, because you have two leads, you have the possibility of doubling that weight. They become 250 a piece. You still combined would be 500 pounds. I mentioned that. You do not have this lift eye. Maintenance, what do you guys have in mind as far as maintenance? I didn't talk about this yesterday. Slipped my mind. Are you going to be doing any type of maintenance? Is it going to go out somewhere?
It would just be minor maintenance that we do. We have, Benton County, comes and maintains our vehicles for us.
And they'll be attending either tomorrow or the next day. Some of their mechanics will be.
Okay, okay. So I'll wait with that for them then. Okay, that'll conclude this portion. You can get on. Okay, DPF regeneration system. Go to the first page. It says after treatment device ATD, Cummins ISL IXX 2010 EPA and 2013 EPA engines. So, basic operation of the after treatment device. 2010, 2013 EPA engines are required to use an after treatment device ATD and a selective catalytic reduction SCR for controlling emissions. These two canisters have replaced the typical muffler. The first canister in the exhaust stream contains a diesel oxidation catalyst, DOC, and a diesel particulate filter, DPF. The DPF will trap particulate matter while the engine is running. Over time, soot and ash buildup in the filter must be removed. Soot buildup is removed by heating the filter until soot oxidizes and turns into a carbon dioxide gas. This process is commonly known as regeneration. So again, over time of operating, soot's going to build up in the filter. It's going to need to be removed. It's going to have to be regenerated. There are two types of regeneration. There is a passive regeneration and an active regeneration. Basically, the difference is, in a passive regeneration, anytime you are operating, you create enough load on the engine, creates enough heat in the DPF, that heat can basically clean the soot out of the DPF in a passive regeneration. An active regeneration can occur in two modes, in parked mode, I should say in automatic mode, or in parked or stationary mode. So the difference between an active and a passive, again, for an active regeneration, basically, first of all, you got a higher level soot buildup. You probably have a DPF light on in the dash indicating you have a higher level of soot load. Again, you create enough load's been created enough on the engine to create enough heat in the DPF. Elevated soot load injects fuel into the exhaust stream. That fuel is burned to clean the soot out of the DPF. So difference between passive and active. Passive, just normal operating, enough heat's being created. During an active regeneration, there's enough heat's generated as well as fuel's injected into the exhaust stream. So that can be done automatically, or we can do an active stationary regeneration. So this is what I'm going to recommend. Over time of operating, again, the DPF light will come on. First opportunity you do have, do a parked regeneration or stationary regeneration. To do so, first of all, you want to park in a clear area that the exhaust heat is not going to damage anything or possibly ignite a fire. The exhaust will exceed 1,000 degrees during the regeneration process. You have to have the transmission in neutral and park and brake set. Engine at idle. At that point, activate your regeneration switch, hold it 8 or 10 seconds and release it. When the command is accepted, the DPF lamp will flash, go off. Engine RPM comes up roughly to 1,000 RPM. At that point, basically stay with the unit till it is complete, roughly 20 to 40 minutes. When it is complete, the engine RPM will drop back to idle. All associated warning lamps should remain off. If you have a check engine, stop engine, malfunction indicator, you will have to have that diagnosed by a Cummins representative. If you do need to interrupt the regeneration process while you are regenerating, so let's say you're out in the pad regenerating, you need to go on a call, you can't interrupt the process. I do recommend activating the same switch you used to initiate the regeneration process, hold it 8 or 10 seconds, release it. The engine RPM will somewhat drop slowly back to idle because there's unburned fuel in that exhaust that needs to be burned off. When it is back at idle, the DPF lamp will come back on, signaling that it has not been completely cleaned. At that point, go about your business. Now during driving, pumping, normal operating, it may be adequate to create enough heat. It may continue the process. The DPF lamp may go off. If the DPF lamp remains on, next opportunity, continue with the regeneration process. Okay, basically that active regeneration stationary, there's a step-by-step instruction the way I just explained it, so I'll give you an idea in case you haven't been through that before. If we continue on where it says selective catalytic reduction, so basically there really is no maintenance with the SCR device. You will just need to keep DEF fluid in the DEF tank. If the DEF fluid drops below a quarter of a tank, the DEF fluid will come on, indicator light will come on. If it drops below an eighth of a tank, it will begin flashing. And as it continues to drop, you'll have a flashing diesel exhaust fluid lamp, check engine lamp, stop engine lamp, and eventually your engine would shut down. It'll derate and then shut down. So keep that adequate fuel, at least above a quarter tank. If you do have a situation where it does drop below, when you fill the tank, they will cancel all those indicators.
There's nothing built into the system that if you're on a fire brand operation, it will supersede this and not shut you down. It will still shut down.
We have a mission critical situation that, let's say your computer crashes. Once your pressure controller is set, it will keep going until you interrupt it or shut it down. I think this will shut you down. It's going to start derating you and eventually it would shut you down.
Even with your pressure controller?
Yeah, I believe so.
We finally got to it.
Like I mentioned earlier, my understanding is about 4 tanks of DEF to 1 tank, I should say 4 tanks of diesel fuel to 1 tank of DEF. So I mean, that would have to be pretty extensive that you would be there, that that you didn't have the DEF fluid there. You get a container in, a couple more gallons, you'd be good for another couple tanks of fuel. So, but it did say at the bottom there, vehicle performance rates and speed limits do not apply to 2013 EPA engines.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with that one just because some of the guys at the factory that deal with these on a regular basis had some issues with them as far as derating and shutting down when they got too far along in the process. So I'm not 100% sure that that is the case. I guess bottom line, if you can keep it above a quarter tank of DEF fluid, you're not going to have any problems.
So I didn't see any of this stuff happen on the trip out. Maybe it's because it hasn't built up enough yet to even need it, right?
It didn't do a regeneration. Well, if you're driving, it'll probably be adequate to clean it. Say like an over the road truck.
Yeah.
Over the road truck doesn't have a park regeneration switch because of the amount of time that they spend traveling. Basically, it takes care of itself. So same situation when you were driving across the country, you just had enough load on the engine, enough heat to keep it cleaned out along the way.
It's done, I've seen a light come on while we've been doing driver training.
Okay, is it the high exhaust system temperature or the DPF lamp? If it's a DPF lamp, it usually stays on for a period of time. The high exhaust system temperature, basically anytime it exceeds 977 degrees, it'll come back on.
Maybe that can get.
And then it'll stay on basically until it drops down below 750.
I think that's all it was.
So I would venture to bet that's what it was as well. Because usually once that soot builds up, that lamp comes on. It's usually on for a period of time. Before
So
it could,
the stop and go driving is probably gonna build up more than open road,
Right.
wide open.
right, right, yeah. Like I say, I don't know what the engine RPM was, 1800, 1850 or whatever it was. That's all it would run
Yeah.
at 60 miles an hour, but that's pretty continuous. So
Yeah.
you're creating a lot of heat there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the Cummins lamps, and I'm just going to briefly go through those. You do have the check engine, amber check engine warning lamp. This can be related to any engine fault. So if you see a check engine lamp, you can drive, operate, but we do recommend when you have a safe opportunity to have that diagnosed by a Cummins representative. And then the red stop engine indicator light is a critical engine fault has occurred. This one I do have to recommend. If you see it come on, shut the engine down. Emergency vehicles don't have any automatic shutdown, so let's say you didn't have any oil pressure. It basically would run until it blows up. So if you see a stop engine, I have to recommend turning it off. Then the diesel particulate filter light or DPF light will come on when you have a need for a regeneration. Again, at this point, I do recommend to park your generation your first opportunity. If it is not clean or regenerated, the DPF lamp will flash. Again, if it's not clean or regenerated, you have a flashing DPF and a check engine light. If you do see a flashing DPF and a check engine, I have to recommend taking the unit out of service immediately and do a park stationary regeneration. If you do not, the fourth stage basically is flashing DPF, check engine, and stop engine. And to get that stop engine comes on, I do have to recommend shut the engine off. Next page, we have our high exhaust system temperature light. Again, that will come on anytime your exhaust temperature exceeds 977 degrees. So again, that can come on and off during normal operating. Then you have your diesel exhaust fluid level lamp. Again, comes on when your fluid level's down below a quarter tank. And you do have a diesel fuel tank and a DEF fluid tank gauge in the dash. Okay, what drops below a quarter tank will come on solid, drops below an eighth of a tank will begin flashing, and then eventually you could have engine and torque rates. And then the malfunction indicator light provides an indication to the vehicle operator that a fault has occurred on an emission related component. Again, do have that diagnosed as soon as possible.